including Strangers in Paradise, Echo, and most recently Rachel Rising, but there is a lot more that we're going to talk about, so please put your hands together for Mr. Terry Moore. They're running a little header and
Hello.
hey, there we go. All right. So first off, welcome. Because this is the Secret Origins panel, the first question that we're sort of asking everyone is, what was the first piece of comics work you were paid for, and how did you break in to get that job?
I remember it. It was just a little spot drawing for Antarctic Press, who was going to publish my miniseries, Strangers in Paradise. And before the miniseries came out was this little spot drawing, and it was a furry version of Francine in a bikini. Really shameless drawing. But it's the first appearance, and I was very proud of it at the time. You know.
And how did you sort of get that breakthrough?
Well, I was talking to them because of Strangers in Paradise, so they started feeding me these, like, do you want to put a ad page in? We had a couple of months before my series started, so, but I hooked up with Antarctic Press because I had taken my Strangers in Paradise first issue in Xerox form to some shows, showed it to everybody and shopped it around, and everybody turned it down. They liked it, but they turned it down. They offered me other work, but they turned that down. And but Antarctic Press called me one day and said, "Hey, we'll do this as a miniseries if you think you can do a second issue."
Wow.
And I said, "I think I can."
Well, I'm curious, back then, because Strangers in Paradise was so sort of ahead of the curve, what reasons were they giving you for turning it down? Were they saying, this won't sell? Or I'm curious what your feedback was on that.
I remember the first con I went to was in Houston. For some reason, DC was there with all of their editors. There were like 7 or 8 of them. And I went to the signing line where the Superman artist was there with his editor, Patty Jarris, and I showed it to them and got their feedback, and then they introduced me to these editors, and I started from a group editor to bigger and bigger, and they said, we like your work and we could start you on some sort of team book or a backup story or something. This story is not what we are interested in, but they liked me as an artist, but they didn't like Strangers in Paradise.
So at what point did you decide, you know what, I'm gonna go this on my own? Because I think at that time, there was Jeff Smith, there's Dave Sim, but there weren't a lot of people sort of self-publishing.
When I did the miniseries with Antarctic Press, I did 3 issues and a trade, and it was the first book that they ever had to reprint. And at the end of all of that, I got my sum total of income from it was $1,700, $1,700 for all that. And I wanted a new job. I wanted a new career to support my family, and that wasn't going to cut it. So I was talking to Jeff and Dave, and they were telling me how they did it, and I was watching them, and they seemed to have careers. So I thought, well, I'm just going to go try that route, which is like auditioning for a singing competition. I mean, you're just rolling the dice.
Right.
Because there were a lot of people that, we don't know about today. They were forgotten. And so I went ahead and I left Antarctic after the miniseries. I said, thanks, guys, but that's not worth it. And I started my self-publishing, and in the very first issue, I made $10,000.
Wow.
In orders through the catalogs, And I thought, okay, now this is much better. Because when you publish with somebody else back then, you would get 17%, which was a lot better than the book industry at 7% or 5%, but it was, still 17% of whatever that comic made. Wow. And that wasn't good enough. But if you self-published, you got 100%. All you had to do was pay your printing bill. And wow. I thought, well, that's the gamble I need to take.
Now, Strangers in Paradise, to me, has always been sort of, on the comics scene, a real legendary book in terms of like LGBT visibility. I'm curious, when you started the book, were you sort of aware that this was something that hadn't been covered in the same format that Stranger in Paradise was? You know, there had been like Alison Bechdel and stuff, but I'm curious.
I thought it had been, because I was super aware of the indie scene and the underground scene. I grew up loving those comics. I was never really a mainstream fan. So I was really aware of all the women cartoonists, and I had my favorites, and I thought that I would, if anything, I was going to get my ass kicked, because here I was drawing semi-lipstick lesbians, which is kind of a no-no. That's a guy thing, right? That's the guy's view. And nobody has a very good opinion of stories told through the man's view. So I was very worried about that. And I think that because of that pressure, because I felt like I was indulging myself by drawing beautiful women with confusing sexuality, I felt more obligated to ground the story and put in as much truth and reality as I could. I did not feel like I could run away with my fantasies.
Right.
You know, you notice that they never went on a wild romantic cruise or had any romantic weekend. Everything was all, you know, they had to fight for what they got, and I think that's probably just my good old Christian guilt right there.
So you got that first order, which was a substantial, not just at that time, but now, I think 10,000 for a first issue in the world of self-publishing is like, holy crap, that's fantastic.
It was fantastic, but remember that I did that the exact same week that Todd McFarlane made $2 million.
Right.
On a Spider-Man.
Yeah.
Most comics were selling in the millions. Like the #1 comic would sell for 1.3 million copies, and that's when all those Image millionaires were made. It was the same year, '93. So I was relative.
Right.
It's the same thing now as having orders of 200.
Well, it's interesting, you know, if you don't mind me skipping ahead in time, because you sort of opened the door to it a little bit, but you actually briefly came under the Image imprint with, I think, the 3rd series of the book, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk a little bit about the formation of that and the transition and what motivated it?
Yeah, it's kind of like talking about what started the Second World War. You have to go back a little bit, because what happened was that when I started in '93, we were the comic industry was a billion-dollar industry, and they had a lot of distributors, like 30 distributors that were working with comics. And I personally had, I think, as many as 18 distributors when I got going. Then they all started crashing. What was driving that was the collectability market and the cards and all that, and people were buying 10 of everything. So when those guys pulled out in the mid-'90s, the distributors started folding one after another, and we were left with just really 2 big guys. One was indie-friendly, one was not. The indie-friendly distributor, who was Capital,
Right.
They were about to close, and we all knew it. And it was the industry buzz that year. Everybody was freaking out, because sadly, every distributor we lost, those orders never showed up anywhere else. We lost those orders too. And so half of everybody's orders were at Capital, and when they folded, you know, it was going to be disastrous. So all the indie guys like me were scrambling, we're going to die, we're going to die. And that's when Image was, they opened their arms and said, okay, we're taking a few select people. So it was like, can you get a seat on the lifeboat? And Jeff made his jump, and Jeff is way smarter than me, and so I thought, if Jeff thinks that that's a good idea, then I better do it too. And, but I had not been invited to that first lifeboat. And I was sitting at home thinking, I'm going to die, I'm going to die. And I got a call from Jim Lee, and he said, I'm going to start this creator-owned branch, and would you like to be, I'm a fan of Stranger in Paradise, would you like to be a part of it? And I hung up the phone, and I went and changed my underwear. I told my wife, and I said, yeah, I think we should do it. And she said, no, I don't think we should. And I said, yeah, we should, because we're in over our head and it's a tricky time. So we did, and we jumped in. And God bless her, my wife wanted to self-publish through all that.
Wow.
So.
And that was Wildstorm, but was it a sub-imprint under Wildstorm? Like how many? It was like Image, Wildstorm, and then
Image was the umbrella company.
Right.
And then each star
like
had his own.
Wildstorm,
So
Top
there was
Cow.
Wildstorm. And then under Jim's Wildstorm, he wanted to start Homage.
Gotcha.
Jim is a corporation himself.
Yeah. And how long did you stay publishing under that, and sort of at what point did you?
I stayed for 1 year, and my goal was that anything with Jim's name on it would be in every comic store in the world.
Right.
And so I got that. It upped my orders by several thousand, and so I got the benefit of that, and he carried me through that rough time, like the strong guy. And about a year later, I was ready to return to self-publishing because we had reorganized and got incorporated, got an accountant, and all this kind of stuff that you really need to keep going after a certain point.
Right.
So we did all that, and then I returned to self-publishing after 8 issues at Homage.
Nice.
And I've been self-publishing ever since.
The Strangers in Paradise omnibus is just about to come out. It's a 2-part omnibus, and it's like 1,000 pages.
1,200 pages each.
Right.
Total story is 2,400 pages.
Wow.
It's a 12-pound book. It's just amazing. I mean, it's just weird. Every page of that is more than I accomplished in high school, total. I can't believe it. But this omnibus, this 2 fat books like this, they include every offshoot story, every one-shot story, like Molly and Pooh's and the source book and all this other stuff and all the poems and everything. Everything is in there. Everything that's SIP is in there.
Is it surreal to look at that and realize that this block represents a tremendous portion of your life?
Yes. You know what I'm glad about is that I can look at that book and have something to show for my time, which is better than I can say for my previous 2 careers. So I'm really glad to leave books in my wake. That feels like it was worth the time.
Speaking just really quickly, and then we'll get back to a little bit of Strangers in Paradise substance, but when you say your previous 2 careers, at what point did you decide to take the plunge and go, I'm going to take a gamble on myself, on doing comics? What was that decision like for you?
Painful. It was painful because I was, had crossed 30, and I was in this job as a TV editor, random access with Avids and all that, and it was a high pressure cooker situation because I was working with expensive clients like Toyota and McDonald's and all that. So you have these big advertising teams come in there, and then 35 people, half of them sick with the flu, are leaning over your shoulder telling you, okay, cut right here, and there'd be 75,000 clicks. And then, what do you think? What do you think? And then, so you binge and kill your health to make a commercial that runs for 1 weekend, and nobody saw it and nobody cared. And I was doing that year after year. I edited for 10 years. So I was sick of it, and I really wanted to do my own stuff. And everybody was saying, well, why don't you start directing? But I didn't like directors. They're little generals, and I'm not a general. I'm an introvert. So I just couldn't do it. And I thought the cheapest way to make a story is to draw comics. There's no design by committee. I'll just do whatever I want, when I want, as fast as I want. And in comics, the minute I stop it, the customer has it in 2 weeks. And I mean, that's so much better than film. And it's better than novels. So I saw that as my door out. I had already, and it was the only talent I had left. I can only do 2 or 3 things, which was I'm a really good musician, and my wife married a musician, and then but I was obviously going to be stuck in the bar scene, so I wanted out. And then so I ended up in the recording studios and then the video studio, and then I realized I couldn't work on other people's stuff. I had nothing left to do but draw and write. So comics were my savior, and I was desperate to do it. Nobody would stop me. So overnight, I went from being like this guy you couldn't get a word out of to, have you seen my comic? Have you seen my comic? Have you seen my comic? And it wasn't for me, it was for the art. And that brought me out to the world, and I've been pushing it ever since.
That's really cool. I'm curious, with Strangers in Paradise, was that the story that you always wanted to tell, that first story? Was that something that had been pinging around? No?
No!
So what made that the first kind of thing that you really jumped on?
It was the easiest one to do. I had another story that I had actually drawn during my band days, and it was a big fantasy story with exotic locations and all that, and I had it in my sketchbook, and it was, you know, colored in pencil and everything. And, but when I started, I thought, I'm not good enough to draw that. I'm not good enough for this yet. And I actually heard one of the Hernandez brothers say the same thing, that, you know, he had held off on stories he wanted to do until he was good enough. So I thought, what is easier for me to do? And the easiest thing for me to do was a semi-comic strip, where it was just basically relationships and talking heads. Because I've been doing comic strips for years at night. So in terms of like two people arguing about anything, pick a subject, I could do that. So I basically I just started drawing this scene where I did the scene where Francine and Freddie break up in the park. And then I figured out what happened to make that happen, then I figured out what would happen afterwards, and I was off.
Wow. Now, will we ever see that fantasy epic that you were working on?
I'd like to, but, you know, of course it's dated now. So I would use it as a launching pad, but I would love to do it because I still haven't seen anything quite like it.
Gotcha.
But you know what? You'll think your story's so clever and there's never been a movie, and then you'll see that it's a 20-second quick idea clip on the Family Guy or something, you know. Right. Or Futurama, you know, they'll run through 7 great sci-fi ideas in 1 minute and just throw them away, you know.
Right.
Now you can never make that movie again.
And every one a log line for a feature film or something.
I know.
You know, it's
They
crazy.
just blow through all these great. One of the best time travel ideas I ever saw was on a little Disney afternoon cartoon on their TV programs. So my son showed me, he said, "Look at this," and it was really sophisticated. And it was just a little, you know, semi-anime, like boom. It would have blown Highland's mind.
Oh my God. So I don't want to get too spoilery. First off, how many people in the room are familiar with Strangers in Paradise, the whole run? Okay, a lot of people. For the folks watching online who maybe haven't read the whole thing and are excited to get their hands on the omnibus, I'm going to keep this general, but the ending of the book, was that always what you had envisioned for the ending, or did your conception of the ending change very radically at any point?
God, that's a kill shot question. Just go right there.
No, I'm sorry.
That's very on point. There was a different ending, and I carried it with me for years. When I started the book, I thought of a different ending and had it, and I would tell people, and they would go,
Are we talking an Asterius polyp level like meteor, or you know?
Well, no, it was going to be a lot more Heathcliff and you know,
right.
But then 9/11 happened, and everybody was just, you know.
Sorry.
It was going to be a Christmas Carol.
Yeah. No. But
9/11 happened,
right.
And we were all so bummed out and so sad. And in the year or two after that, I thought I changed my mission statement. First, my mission statement was to impact the reader as much as possible. I just want big reactions, and if I can break your heart, yeah. But then I thought, you know, those are cheap shots,
right?
Because we can all be manipulated into getting our buttons pushed. And then I thought about, because of 9/11, I was thinking grander, and I was thinking about how in a lot of hard times in history, it was the writers and artists that carried society, and gave them hope and got them through bad times, or whether it's a tyrant or bad politics or bad economic times. The arts carried the people through. And ultimately, we don't remember the names of kings and their politics, but we are left with these wonderful works that are always inspiring and hopeful to us as people. So I changed my goals as a creator to have my work be more useful to people and more inspiring. And so I changed the ending to Strangers in Paradise so that it would be a story of hope that two people can pull themselves through some bad years and end up on the other side just great.
Awesome. I want to get to your newer creator-owned works in a second, but briefly I want to talk about the fact that you've done a lot of work for hire elsewhere, everything from, I believe, Buffy to The Runaways. You followed up Joss Whedon, which can have been an enviable task.
I'm a fool.
A Spider-Man book. So can you talk a little bit about that work elsewhere and how you felt about it, what you were excited about, what you...
I think that kind of, I started getting invitations to do these other books after I did this Strangers in Paradise parody of Xena. And stupidly, I did the parody and then sent it off to the printer. And the day it came out is the day I realized, oh, I'm about to make money off Xena. Maybe I should have asked permission. And I suddenly was panicked because this was the first comic I'd ever done that was sold out before it shipped. Because they were, Xena fans. I was tapping in. And
cross-promotional, there was this synchronicity there.
Yes, well, and gee, I never thought of that. So there I'm at home, wringing my hands, waiting on a call from a lawyer, and I got an email from the producer who said, we all saw it and we thought it was cute and more power to you. So I got away with it. They let me live. And then after that, I started getting calls from other people like, Dark Horse, do you want to do a Buffy thing? And I had met Amber, and she was really sweet. She was writing for them.
Is it Amber Benson who played Tara on Buffy, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
And she's actually an incredible creator, writer, director, very creative person, but her writing is wonderful. And I looked at her script, which was very professional, and there were 2 scenes in there I'd never seen before in fiction, and I wanted to draw them, so I said, yes, I'll do this. Then when I got the gig, I thought, oh no, I am the cameraman. I am responsible for Amber and Allison's image. And the cameraman has a lot of responsibility to flatter and not unflatter somebody.
Right.
And I suddenly realized I'd taken that on. And so it was a stressful job to draw, and I wanted to be sure that I gave them the respect that they were due, because I adore them. And then I got to draw those really cool scenes where there was one scene was a victim trapped in the roots of a tree, underneath the roots of a tree, intertwined, all by witchcraft. And that stayed with me and made me help create Rachel Rising years later.
Really?
Yeah, and I actually kind of redrew that cover for one of the covers of Rachel Rising.
It's really interesting.
But that's how I started getting those calls, and then one after another. And then The Runaways and Spider-Man Loves Mary Jane, that was because I was ending SAP. I wanted a few months off to do something else, and I called Joe Quesada and said, do you have anything for me? And he said, I'll call you right back. And he said, how about these 2 books? And I said, yeah. So it was fun.
What was the experience like on The Runaways? Because obviously, I think it's safe to say that with a lineage that includes Brian K. Vaughan and Joss Whedon, that is a tough, it's like following up, Brian Michael Bendis and Ed Brubaker on Daredevil. That is an unenviable task.
Yes, it is. I have to admit that the day the light switch clicked in my head that I wanted to go pro, the first day, and when I started out with that first Xerox, something flipped in my head that made me decide I belong here. And every time I met a stranger, I always thought, you're going to know me someday. It's like that Gary Clark song, you're going to know my name. So I always had that attitude that I need to feel like I belong on this playing field. And so when that came along, I realized that it's a setup where I could really fall on my face. But you have to feel like you're good enough to be there. Otherwise, they wouldn't even be giving you that job. So I really didn't spend a lot of time stressing about it.
Cool.
Stressing is about whether you should or shouldn't be in that job is, I think, something amateurs can afford to do, but not a pro on a deadline.
And what of all the non, creator-owned work that you've done, what's your favorite thing that you've worked on?
Definitely Spider-Man Loves Mary Jane, because the only superhero comic I really liked was the 60s Spider-Man. And it's because they were in high school, and he was a real guy, and the coolest thing in any given issue might be that he was walking on a ceiling. I mean, he wasn't doing the universe or space or Venom or anything.
Right.
It was just, stuff you could relate to, like, I can jump up here right now, in my socks. And he had Gwen Stacy, who was actually the love of his life, and they're the pair that should have been together, and everything that happened after her death was alternative universe that shouldn't have been. I stopped reading it when Gwen died. That was the end of the story. And I heard several other people last night say the same thing.
Jerry Conway is here. Don't tell him.
Get me face to face with him. He was 21 years old and wrote that just to make, a big splash. And look, we're stuck with it for the rest of our lives.
It'll get retconned someday. Don't worry. No, I mean, it is.
I have trashed him in print so many times. And I'm very bitter about Gwen Stacy's death. Very, very bitter. Sweet girl. What did she ever do to him? And, but anyway, so I loved working on the book because it was the high school group, all in high school with Gwen. And I was proud that I drew the only cover I can think of that actually had Gwen, Mary Jane, and the sassy blonde, Flash's girlfriend. I forget her name.
Oh, it's not. Sorry, I don't know why Felicia Hardy
I know,
popped into my head because it's
blanked
not her.
Anyway,
Yeah.
they're all three there talking about, and MJ is showing how Spidey does this. And then Peter's walking in the background. This little half-head thing going on.
His spider sense tingling.
Uh-huh.
Echo, I think people had read Strangers in Paradise, and then Echo was so, had this kind of amazing sci-fi element, and it's such a cool book. I mean, there's something about that first issue with the sky raining drops of mercury that is really arresting. How did you decide on that as your next project, and sort of how long had you been contemplating that before you jumped into it?
The answer to that doesn't do me any favors, I'm afraid. I finished SIP and I was empty. We had a party in New York to shut it down, and then I spent the next 7 months not even thinking about what to do next. I really was just like recharging. And I had a drawer full of ideas, but when I pulled them out, they all looked dated. And you need to know that when you look at something. You need to be harsh and honest. So they weren't going to work. When push comes to shove, I knew I couldn't publish that. So basically, I was back to square one. And I didn't want to do the sci-fi story because I just didn't feel like it was time, that original old one. So I waited and waited, and then Robin said, "Okay, we got to get going again." And once I had some pressure on me, I thought, "Oh gosh, what am I going to do? What am I going to do?" And we actually sat down at square one with a blank paper and said, "Okay, it's going to be about a woman because you do better at that." Now what? I don't know. And I started writing these scenes, like novel ideas. And one of the scenes I had was basically a woman that had something on her, and she's on the run on the California coastline, and people are after her.
It's like a wind tunnel.
Stay still. So I launched from that idea. And then Robin was saying, "Yeah, she's got some metal on her back." And I said, "Nobody wants to see her back. It's on her front." And we went from there.
Right.
And then once I had that idea, if you give me an idea, like I can make up something. I can make up a lot of lies real fast, and that's all I did.
That's great. I had heard that is there a movie option on Echo? Is that correct?
There was, for 3 years, a movie option that recently just expired. So it's back on the market, and my agent is out there shopping it again.
And Strangers in Paradise, the same sort of question?
Strangers in Paradise has only been optioned once, and it was with the HBO animation department that put out the Spawn and the Ralph Bakshi.
Wow.
When they had HBO animation.
Right.
That company folded just as it was SIP's turn. So it came back to me, and I've had it ever since. The problem with Strangers in Paradise is it's not one story, it's a lot of stories. It's not a movie, it's a TV series that goes on for about 7 years. Tell me the plot to The Sopranos. You know, tell me the plot to Big Bang Theory. There isn't one. It's just a way to live with the characters. And SIP really doesn't have a plot. It's just a way to live with these girls for a few years, and a lot of stuff happens. And I never wanted to write a spec script because every waiter in LA has one.
Right.
And I didn't want to join the crowd of the undead.
You didn't want to be the guy on the laptop in Starbucks typing away at your masterpiece?
J.K. Rowling wannabe.
Right.
Look, I'm using pen and paper. The problem is that a lot of creative people in LA are fond of it, but when they get into their first business meeting and have to explain it to a suit and tie in 2 minutes, it falls. You can't explain it. So I don't know if it's ever going to get there. That influenced me when I did Echo and Rachel. I knew that I needed to work more high concept. SIP is more of an indie comics and self-indulgent, thing, but the other two series you can explain them real fast and it's real obvious, and they go like this.
So Rachel Rising, moving on to that series, I had one question actually from sort of a graphic design standpoint, which is that the covers of every issue have that kind of amazing red and green element. I'm curious, and I apologize if this is getting a little wonky, but I'm curious if you found that using the same color scheme on every cover was sort of a graphic help, or in a weird way a graphic hindrance, in the sense that people thought it was linked to the prior issue. Just because I've heard a lot of comic creators say, "Oh, sometimes I wish I had not done similar color schemes."
I was thinking about that a little bit, and I thought about how many issues would make up a trade paperback for a mini arc. And so what I did was I came up with a color palette for each trade paperback. So the trades are six issues each, and for the first 6 issues they have this 3-color palette.
Right.
The next 6 issues have another 3-color palette, and so on. And by looking at all your Rachels, you can tell all these are yellow and red, all these are green and red, all these are purple and red. And it's just a designer thing I like to do. And I mentioned it to the hardcore fans. They knew. But I never told the public. And it's just something that if you lay them out someday, they might say, "Oh, look, they all kind of match." The only bad thing you can really do is, and I did this and learned, is to put, if you have, like, say, issue 12, if you put issue 13's cover with its number and everything on the back, that's really bad, because then when people have them all, if the comic is turned over, they're totally confused.
Right.
So there is, you want to keep them separate, but I just really like the idea of having some sort of, I went to so much trouble in Echo to lay it all out to Phi.
Right.
That I wanted to do something, something like that, where there was some forethought into how Rachel was laid out.
Cool. We're going to open it up to questions really soon. I have 2 more questions. Rachel Rising, you said that it dates back almost to that Buffy comic with the person tied up in the roots of the tree. The rest of it, and the idea of someone coming back. What about that sort of excited you, and had that idea been culminated, or sort of fermenting all the way back to Buffy?
Well, all my stories are really about the same thing. It's about a victim coming back to face off the predator. In SIP, it was Kachu's demons, and how she so bravely eventually found the tools to face back on the demons that had brought the misery in her life, and she did. And it made for some great scenes. And then Rachel is doing the same thing, facing off the demon of scientific and political and big bully guy thought, like we need to invade something, and this time we're invading science and physics, and even though it's going to blow us all up. And then in Rachel, she's coming back to face the predators that put her in that grave. My fantasy is that The thing, well, we say, it's Kachu is the one who said it, is that you think about little girls falling prey to predators, and the thing is, those little girls grow up, and they're going to be standing eye to eye with some of those predators someday, and that's now I'm interested as a writer. That's what I want to write, because we all need that hope and that payoff to know that that girl has the power, and so I'm writing about getting the power back and what you do with it.
Last question, and we touched on it a little bit earlier, but one of the biggest issues in comics today is the importance of creator-owned work versus work for hire. Now, obviously, you've been working creator-owned for the majority of your career, but I'm just curious if you can kind of weigh in on that debate and the fact that it really does seem to have built to this huge tipping point when we have a year with Brian K. Vaughan, Ed Brubaker, Grant Morrison making the leap to Image Comics, which is a pretty seismic moment since the inception of Image Comics back in '93 when we had all these superstar artists.
In the artist community, having your own comic is like having your own band. So if you're working in Assembly Line Comics, it's like being one of those paid musicians in Britney Spears' band. I mean, it's a good gig. I mean, all your gear's paid for, and you get to stand and watch Britney's ass all night. But it's not your band, and you're gonna have to play that schlock. So it's either that or have your own indie band and have your 5 fans, and you're dirt poor, but you're playing what you want. Plus, working on a mainstream book is a lot like being the third husband. There may be some love there, but the kids will never trust you. You're not the guy that created it. You're not the guy that made it popular. That guy's long gone and very much missed. And so now you're the new stranger, and all you can do is mess it up. So you're on parole. Everybody's watching you. They hate you before you show up. It's like a Disney movie about the new guy in the house.
Oh man! So Terry Moore with 3 of the greatest analogies for work for hire I've ever heard.
Boom.
Questions from the audience. Just raise your hand if you've got one, and if you need some time to think about it, I can throw another question at Terry.
Why is there air?
It's tough to see out there, so if you have one, speak up. All right.
I think I've answered all their questions.
You may have answered all their questions. Well, let me ask, what's next for you? Obviously, the omnibus is coming out. Rachel is happening.
I'm going to finish Rachel. I'm a little more than halfway in. Issue 15 is currently on a truck trying to avoid crashing on an overpass right now. And it'll be in stores soon. I think I'm going to go to issue 24.
Okay.
But, if that's what I'm trying to get the gang and the story to do, which would take me for 1 more year. I do 9 issues a year by putting them out every 6 weeks. That's 9 a year. Mm-hmm. After that, I think I've really gotten all this heavy Hitchcock dark stuff out of my system. So I'm going to go lighter in the next series, and I have it ready to go because I actually wrote it a number of years back, and showed it to Shelley Bond at Vertigo because we wanted to work together. We're friends, and Shelley loved it, and Karen Berger loved it, and so it was going to go to Vertigo, but we just couldn't work it out, the business thing.
Right.
And because you know me, I'm not going to do 17%, and so it's back in my hands, and it's all ready to go. I mean, so I think I'm going to do that one next.
Can you give us any hints about what that might be, whether it's genre or anything about it?
It's going to be more accessible, more all ages,
okay.
Lighter in humor, and more of a fantasy-based story. I haven't done anything quite like it before, so that's probably all I should say. Otherwise,
okay.
You put the bad stink on it.
Right. I totally get that. I had a question about something else, and again, feel free to raise hands at any time. But you recently, something I had not really seen before, Robert Kirkman included part of Rachel Rising in the back of a Walking Dead comic. That's a sort of publishing promotion. I've never really seen much like that. Can you talk about how that came about?
That bizarre?
Yeah.
That cost me a fortune. No.
No, I was going to say, 'cause
it came about because Eric Stevenson, the editor, contacted me and offered it. He said he and Robert were fans of Rachel and liked it and wanted to help it find more readers. And they offered that. So, I mean, gosh, that was just, what a wonderful professional hug from those guys. So it was terrific. Very much appreciated.
Yeah, well, and also it seems like kind of a great fit. You have a black and white horror comic that also, can sort of open some doors. Did you find that helped with orders slightly down the line?
Actually, no. I don't think I didn't see any bump in orders. There's nothing you can do to up your orders in the print world. Nothing. They're just going to be. I sell the same number of an issue now that I sold of SIP number 1.
Really?
It's always the same number. There's nothing I can do to grow it. I've tried everything over the last 20 years. Nothing works. Recommendations or like Neil Gaiman quote or advertising or ad space or go to 12 cons or go to no cons, none of it makes any difference. The stores order what they want and then that's all you get. It can be their number 1 selling book and they'll be amazed that it sells out every time, but they don't order more.
Wow.
Yeah, and it can be the best, it can outsell Batman on this side of the street and the store on the other side of the street can't sell a 1. And so you're never going to change those two.
Right.
It's just the dynamics of brick and mortar. Nothing good happened to my sales until Comixology came along. And
Really?
Suddenly Comixology connected me to the rest of the world. Outside of the direct market. And Comixology's numbers did not take away from the brick and mortar numbers. They stayed the same. It was all add-on. It was like getting a new distributor.
That's fascinating because I know there's this huge debate of, print versus digital and piracy and everything else, but I think that's fascinating that to a certain extent, I think people take for granted there's this comic book audience, there's the set number of people, and it's a dwindling number that read comics. And now with iPads, I think it's suddenly become weirdly more accessible to everyone because, you're sitting in the airport with your iPad or whatever. But that's really interesting to hear that Comixology, do you think that your work has appealed to an underserved audience in comics, and that helps, that there are people who maybe aren't superhero fans, but that suddenly find your work and go, hey, wait, there's something that speaks to me.
Yeah, there's definitely a syndrome where you make a book and then it goes out and finds readers either it has a Cinderella story or it spends the next 100 years finding reader one at a time. And my work has always found readers one at a time. It's just this slow, accumulative thing. It's weird. The first time I put out the first SIP trade paperback, the orders were small enough that my print one was 3,000. And I've reprinted 3,000 copies so many times now that I don't know, I think it's like 1 million in sales.
Wow.
Because that book's been reprinted more than I can even count, over 30 times. But if you take all the SIP books and the trades and everything like that, the accumulative sales are really big, but they were all done small increments at a time. The thing about digital is that when we talk about print and the world of print and comic stores, we all tend to be urbanites. We're all surrounded by a lot of stores. But the people that can't get them, stores 10 hours away, or like New Zealand or Ireland or
Right.
Australia or Africa, there's the rest of the world out there. It's not just us in Chicago. So that's who was waiting for print accessibility so that they could get comics and read them the same day instead of these terrible delays or these terrible shipping costs for their orders to
Right.
Amazon. So and now that Comixology has become the obvious hub, I mean, that's where everybody looks, and so their sales have gone up.
Nice. what advice would you give someone who's trying to break into the industry now?
You know, Bill Willingham had an interesting comment yesterday about that. He said there's nothing to break into.
Mm.
There's nothing you have to break to get into comics anymore. If you want to draw comics, you just draw your comic and put it on your website and tweet it and DeviantArt it and tumble it and do all that, and you will find your fan group, and it will grow just like all the other online comics grew. When you've got enough of them, make everybody give you money for a print run and do a trade and put your trade out. I mean, that's the way you do it now. Unless you specifically want to draw Batman, and then there is a guy who can keep you from doing that.
Right.
And you have to convince him, you know. And but at least your mission is clear, you know. I mean, you know who the editor of your favorite character is, and you just keep copying his artist until you get that job. But if you just want to be a comic creator, the minute you say you are one, and you draw your first page, you are. And all you're missing now is just... I always had, the way I kept myself going in the beginning was telling myself that I had fans, I just needed, it was my job to find them. And that's really every cartoonist's job, every band's job, every creative person. Whatever you're making, you have fans out there. They just don't know you yet. They're looking for you. Because when I did Stranger's Paradise, I did it because I wanted to read it. I couldn't find the book quite like it. The closest thing I could find was this story by David Chelsea. I read it, but I didn't like it because the people weren't attractive enough to me, the characters. Mm-hmm. So I did my version, and that was all the motivation I needed. And then once I put it out there, I thought only people exactly like me would find it or like it, but a broader base did, and the book found its own audience, you know. I don't know, there's a dynamic. Once you create your work and put it out there, there's a dynamic that doesn't require you. All you have to do is draw and just get it posted, and then let physics run its course. And the way I covered my bets was I just kept putting stuff out. It's not like I'm trying to live off the first issue of SIP. Look at all the crap I had to make after that. If I had stopped at the last issue of SIP, nobody in this room would even remember me. It's all about what you've done this week. Whatever you did last week is so over. So you have to keep making it every day. You know, keep being on the scene.
I think that's amazing advice. You guys, huge round of applause for Mr. Terry Moore. Thank you so much. That was awesome. That was really cool.
You guys are so shy.
I know. You should always feel free.
You didn't want to be on Global